Hello YouTube, hope you've been doing well. I hope you all have been having a great fall so far. I do love the season of fall, however, I find this time of year I get very drowsy. I'm just tired more often. I just find myself having a lot of nothing days. I just want to sit and chill. Today's just been one of those days I haven't been running around and being super busy or anything. I just wanted to read and film. Today I want to share with you some recent favorites of mine. These are the non-bookish favorites in my life at the moment. I'm going to share with you some things that I enjoy and some things that I've been watching. Many of them I enjoyed, one of them not so much. So first let's talk about music. So one artist I've been really listening to lately is Rune. So in my last couple videos I've been saying that I've been really drawn to the Norse pantheon. I also love the show Vikings. And if you watch Vikings, you know that it has an amazing soundtrack. And a lot of it is written by the band Rune. Rune writes a lot of music that's inspired by the Norse faith, and it's all sung in a mixture of Norwegian and Old Norse. I just started listening to their albums properly all the way through lately, and I've been loving their music. It's really haunting and beautiful, and it not only kind of recalls the nostalgia for that period, but it also brings the Norse spirituality and that mentality to life. And I actually have tickets to go see them live in June, so I'm really excited. The next artist is Woodkid. I guess you could say Woodkid is sort of French alternative pop. So I was in the middle of my dissertation this summer and my work was really getting me down, and my friend sent me a couple of motivational songs, one of which was Run Boy Run by Woodkid. And so Run Boy Run pretty much became my dissertation anthem all this summer. But yeah, there really is nothing like Woodkid's music. I think he's kind of a one-man band, but Woodkid's music feels modern but also really old at the same time. My other favorite song by Woodkid is Iron, which I think has been featured in a lot of different video game trailers and such. I actually think Run Boy Run was in the Umbrella Academy soundtrack. Also, I've been listening to a lot of Florence and the Machine. I've been especially loving her album How Big, How Blue, How Beautiful. I've actually been listening to Florence and the Machine for a long time now, but somehow I've been especially in the mood for her recently. This past year, I've been in a really tough place several times, and the raw emotion that Florence puts into her voice just really has resonated with me. Next up is a podcast, and that is Overdue podcast. So basically in Overdue, two guys, Craig and Andrew, sit down, and one of them has read a book that everybody should have read by now, and hilarity ensues, and they make all kinds of jokes about the stories, but also they manage to have some really insightful discussions about the books they're reading that week. But that sort of comedy, bookish mood has been something I've been really into, and it was another thing that really got me through my dissertation this summer. One night this summer, I actually had to pull an all-nighter. I loaded about 8 or 9 back episodes of Overdue onto my phone, and I just played them through the night while I was crunching out my draft, and it kept me awake. It actually got me through my all-nighter. So if you do like bookish podcasts and you're looking for one, I definitely recommend Overdue. My next favorite is a tarot deck, actually. Tarot has been a part of my life for years now. It's always been an amazing tool for me to process everything that's going on in my life at the moment, and it's also something I really like doing for other people to help them talk through issues that they might be going through at the time. And often it's been very rewarding to be at least a small part of that healing process. So in terms of decks, I used to be pretty monogamous with one deck, and that was a pocket version of the Juliet Sharman Burke deck. That deck is pretty heavily based on the traditional Smith-Waite deck. But lately, I've been really attached to the Steampunk Tarot deck. I've had this deck for at least 3 years now, but for some reason recently it's been really resonating with me, and now it's my main reading deck. But I really love the art in this deck. I love the really artful and creative interpretations of the card meaning. And of course, I've always really loved steampunk, but sometimes steampunk art can be really tacky and kitsch. But that aesthetic is done really gracefully in this deck. My next favorite is a video game, and that is Stardew Valley. If you're really into gaming, this probably needs no introduction. It's like if Farmville and The Sims blended to form a game with actually good story and world and characters. I've been really wanting to get back into gaming for a while, but I hadn't been recently. I'm not a big gamer, but I find that when I get really into a game, it becomes a really addictive time sink for me. And I didn't want any of that interfering with my degree this past year, but now I have free time to game. I've been playing a co-op game with my housemate and friend Robert. I think we've played about 75 hours at this point. It is really that good. It has such a cute aesthetic and really quirky characters. And generally the game has a chill vibe and a story-based aspect to it. Two things that I really like in my games. And also the music is so good. I've been getting into it so much that I actually have the soundtrack now. And if you like games at all, play this game. And now I'd like to talk about some things that I have watched or have been watching or have seen recently. The first two are films. First of all is the Downton Abbey movie. Downton Abbey is one of my favorite shows. I really love how this show was a political drama, a family drama, and a very slice of life drama. It's kind of escapist, but deals with a lot of the realities of a changing society. So of course I've been really excited for this movie for months, and I actually brought my boyfriend along to see it, and bless him, he was not the target audience. But we both managed to enjoy the film. It was actually pretty solid. The plot is not very high stakes. I mean, if you have seen the show all the way through, you know that there are some pretty high stakes plots in some of those episodes. And this show was not that. So basically the Crawleys are hosting the royal family at their place. So there's all kinds of politics with the servants interacting with each other. There's all kinds of struggles with hierarchy and power. But the thing is, there have been a few episodes like that with different households interacting with each other and having to compromise on different duties. So I felt like it was an episode that I had seen some version of before. Basically, it was one really long episode of Downton Abbey. I mean, Tom Branson was still dealing with being a bit of an outsider in the family, and Lady Mary sort of struggling between taking on the destiny of the household. So, I mean, if you wanted to go for any sort of deep plot, you're not really gonna get it with this film. But this movie was really meant to be fan service. I was okay with that. I mean, I like seeing all my favorite characters again. And now for something entirely different. My boyfriend and I were in Brighton over the weekend and we saw Joker. And Joker probably needs no introduction. You probably know what it's about. You've probably seen it in the news. And I was a bit nervous going in to see this film because I saw how polarizing it was. But I actually really enjoyed it, and I did not think it was glorifying any sort of fringe violent persona at all. It just showed the process of creation of these types of villainous personalities. Definitely the film makes you feel very uncomfortable, and I personally think that it just makes people confront the humanity in themselves and how they themselves can be pushed into a darker direction. And I think it's a good thing in media when we really confront that. And the whole thing, of course, is really well filmed and very well directed, is very good at building tension and really good at delivering payoff after building all that tension up. And of course, it's very well acted. Joaquin Phoenix is really amazing. I love watching his expressions shift throughout the film, and I love that with one twitch of a muscle, you can tell that something is gonna go wrong. It made me feel so many things, so many complicated emotions that I have never felt in a comic book film before. My boyfriend were talking about it for hours afterwards because we had so much to say about it. So definitely, it's a very thought-provoking film. I still highly recommend seeing it. I still definitely think it's an important film, and there's some really important discussions we should be having about the topics that are addressed in it. So some other things that I've been watching recently are Alan Moore documentaries. So in case you don't know, Alan Moore is the genius behind graphic novels like V for Vendetta, Watchmen, and comic book characters like Swamp Thing. If you've been watching this channel for a long time, you know that I talk about his work a lot here. So a couple of years back, Comic Book Girl 19, online personality that I love, she did a Watchmen book club. And during discussions of the book, she'd sometimes play clips from documentaries about Alan Moore. So I actually decided to watch the documentaries that she featured in full. So one is called Monsters, Maniacs, and More. That was made in the 80s. The other one is The Mindscape of Alan Moore, which I think was made in 2003. I love listening to Alan Moore talk. His idiolect is so distinct. And the way he sees the world is on a whole other level. I feel like my mind just expands every time I hear him speak. And he has such interesting takes on the state of the world today and spirituality and the nature of art. When I'm in need of food for the soul, I always pull up one of those documentaries, or I pull up an interview of him. I really just love listening to him speak. It really rejuvenates my creative energy and my spirit. Funny tidbit, my thesis supervisor for my most recent master's, his last name is also Moore. And when I was writing my acknowledgements, I almost thanked Alan Moore for overseeing my thesis project. Yeah, I'm glad I caught that one. Next up, I just finished marathoning The Americans. and oh my god, what a show. It's about two Russian spies living in the US during the Cold War, I believe during the 80s. They are masquerading as a married couple with 2 kids. It is a spy show, but really it's a very nuanced narrative about human beings doing their best in these really complicated systems. And I loved watching these 2 main characters struggle with the ideologies ingrained into them during their youth, while being confronted with the humanity of the people who are supposed to be their enemies. Living in a land of plenty after having survived food scarcity during World War II, benefiting from capitalism while actively working to bring it down, and they still have a job to do. And at times I really just came out of this show really respecting these Russian spies. They're so committed to doing their job well, even when internally they're kind of grappling with their worldview. I had to pace my viewing of this show because at times it got quite stressful, especially the last season. The tension was so thick. And then the season finale. And now I have no more Americans to binge, and life is an empty place. I was just talking to a friend of mine who has also binged the entire show, and we were just saying, there is nothing like the Americans. It is so rare to find something like that, and we don't know if we'll ever find anything like that again. It's unique. It's in its own league. It's on another level. Next up, I want to talk about The Boys. The Boys is probably one of the best superhero shows I have seen in a long time. It's based on the comic book series by Garth Ennis. Basically, it takes place in a world where there are superheroes, but many of them are really not good people. They're just as susceptible to the pitfalls of fame just like any normal human being. The characters are really nicely developed. There's some really well-paced storytelling. My boyfriend and I sat down to watch this, and we realized that in the first episode, so much had already happened. And we were really surprised because so many times in TV shows, a lot of story is just stretched out to fit the runtime, and there's just a lot of fluff and unnecessary scene, but it really wasn't the case with this show. It's just a really good, solid show. Another show I watched recently was Chernobyl. I was in Australia this summer for an academic conference, and I had some really long flights. On my way back to London, I watched all of Chernobyl. Such a cheerful viewing choice. This is of course a dramatization of the true events around the Chernobyl disaster. It's a series that really doesn't hold back on the sheer awfulness of that event. It explores the political corruption that led up to the disaster, and also the really devastating human consequences of that. There's also a lot of body horror in this show because radiation poisoning is not nice. So if you are interested in this show but you're kind of squeamish, be warned. And recently, my boyfriend and I have been watching Lucifer on Prime. The basic premise is that the devil has decided to quit his job as ruler of hell, and he moves to LA and runs a nightclub. He meets this female detective, takes an interest in her, and decides to go around solving crimes with her. So it is a crime show, but the crimes aren't as interesting as the characters themselves. They really are just there to serve character development. Lucifer is an entertaining character, if sometimes a bit irritating. It's just an all-around fun show with an interesting take on the devil's personal philosophy. So this show is based on the comic book series Lucifer, which is a spin-off of Neil Gaiman's Sandman universe, where the devil does feature a lot. The comic book series does have the same premise of the devil going to LA to run a nightclub, but that's about where the similarity ends. The story of the comic book series is much more concerned with Lucifer's dealings with more supernatural forces, whereas the show is much more camp and comedic. And it's not bad, they're just both good in their own way. And finally, I want to talk about a show that I didn't really enjoy. So, Carnival Row. This was a show I was very curious about. It has fairies, it has a Victorian-esque setting. What more could I ask for? The premise is that the land of the fairies is the point of a colonial conflict between 2 human nations, and a lot of fairies flee to this one nation as refugees. Interesting premise, lots of potential in my eyes, but I was just really let down by this show. Not just that, I was bored with this show, which is probably worse. The world of the show had the promise of being very interesting and complicated, but rather than being introduced to a lot of those things, we just spent a lot of time with the 2 main leads who were frankly not very interesting characters. I am sorry, but I was not interested in their story or their romance at all. And really, the fairies themselves weren't even that interesting. They were really just a device for this ham-fisted narrative about discrimination against refugees. And you guys, we know that racism and othering is bad, but it felt like the show was just ramming that message down our throats without any nuance or subtlety, and that just feels really patronizing. My boyfriend and I gave it 3 episodes and we stopped watching. We felt we gave it a proper chance. But I'm just curious, if you watched the entire series, did you like it? Did you not like it? Did it get better? So those were some recent favorites of mine and things that I've been watching in the past couple months. Let me know down below if there have been things that you've been enjoying recently. I am also working on a vlog of my trip to Brighton. That may or may not be up by the time this video is up, but in the meantime, you can follow me on Twitter and Goodreads. Like this video if you liked it. And I'm 50 subscribers away from 1,000, so subscribe if you like my content. Again, I hope you're having a great fall. Remember to be kind to yourself, and I'll see you in my next video.